So Rabosai, today we want to learn a little bit about something called the Tapuach, which is on the Gag of the Mizbeach, and then to learn a little bit about the Kevesh. So as far as the Tapuach is concerned, which you'll see on the right side of page Gimel, he says, there was an Aremas Efer Gdola, there was an accumulation of the ashes from those Emurim that were burnt on the Gag HaMizbeach, and that entire accumulation of Efer is called Tapuach. And the reason for the name Tapuach is because Tapuach is considered a round fruit, and the Efer was placed into a round pile. The Rosh, quoted here in the note, says that Kol Dover Mekubatz Gavoa Nikra Tapuach, that anything that's gathered together and rises above the ground level is called a Tapuach. Tapuach is kind of like a hill. And he quotes another opinion that Kol Tsuraso Ugdolo Shal Tapuach, he says that the tsura and the way a tapuach grows is very similar to this accumulation. So what do? Kol Yom B'Shachar, every morning in the Beis Hamikdash, with daybreak, after they were makayim the mitzvah of Trumas Hadeshen, then they would move the Efer, Mefanim min hamarocha hagdola, es every ha'olos ve'imurei ha'korban shalom nis'aklu kol halayla menichim osom b'tzidei ha'mizbeach. So the first job after Trumas Hadeshen is to begin to get down to the bottom of this pile, and what you'll find there is a varim of a carbon ola or a carbon asham, whatever carbon it is. And even though it was left on the roof of the Mizbeach overnight, these avarim, nevertheless, lo nis'aklu, they were not totally burnt up. And what we have to do is, we have to take these parts, these avarim of the animal that shelo nis'aklu, and we have to put them on the side of the Mizbeach. What happens with them after they're placed on the side of the Mizbeach? Now we're up to stage 4. So stage 4, number 1, is Haramas Hadeshen, otherwise known as Trumas Hadeshen. Stage 2 is to be mafane the top layer, expose the bottom layer, and remove those avarim shelo nis'aklu. Now, once we remove them, we're ready for stage 3, and that means we take those avarim shelo nis'aklu, we lift them and place them on the side of the Mizbeach. Now we're ready for stage 4. And that's called Gorfin Es Hadeshen B'Magrefos. There are a scattering of these avarim shelo nis'aklu around the Mizbeach. We have to gather them together. And we do that with magrefos. Magrefos is like a shovel. And mikol tzadei hamizbeach, on all sides of the Mizbeach. And what's going to happen is, v'haya ke'arema al gabi tapuach. The language here is very ambiguous. He says that it becomes like a pile. Obviously, when you shovel together all these avarim into one pile, it's part afer, but not totally ashes. You form an arema. But then he calls it al gabi tapuach. That's a little bit strange because you're on the tzidei hamizbeach. Where are you when he says b'tzidei hamizbeach? Are you on the gag? So I would suggest, and again, if I'm wrong, I'm wrong, that tzidei hamizbeach here, which again is that ambiguous phrase, doesn't mean on the ground level, on the round side of the mizbeach, but rather on the gag of the mizbeach. So there's a scattering of these a varm shalom nisaklu around the corners of the Gag HaMizbeach. And now with my grafos, we gather all of them together. And now we create a kind of a tapuach, a pile. The achagat gorfin es harema bifaschatar. Okay, that's a special kli. It's like a pitchfork. Ukshenis rabbe deshen rabbe tapucha morino solamata motzino solachutz leir l'shefach hadeshen. We wait until there's a very sizable and significant collection of these Eivarm Shlonis Aklu in this Tapuach. Again, after we collected it all together, gathered it together. And now we have to take it out chutz le'ir. We have to bring it outside of Yerushalayim. And presumably this was done by one of the Kohanim. And then it is added to the Deshen, because the Trumas HaDeshen took the Deshen out of Yerushalayim. And that when it came to the Shalosh Regalim, they would actually leave this stockpile high up in the middle of the Mizbeach, and that was considered Noy Mizbeach. Again, why would you consider a round collection of ashes as something that beautifies as an ornament for the Mizbeach? The only thing I could say is that this is reminiscent of a Mishnah Pesachim that we spoke about, where on Erev Pesach, the Azara was knee deep in dam. And the Gemara says that that's beautiful. You know, this is the dam of Kodshim. And here also we have the Eivarim that were taken onto the Mizbeach, and we did Aktorah on the Mizbeach. I mean, those Eivarim, even though now they're almost completely Efer, are a Noil Mizbeach. We have also Mishnah in Sukkah that during the days of Sukkot, they used to take the arava, the willow, and they used to put it on the Mizbeach. And they used to declare Noilecha Mizbeach, Noilecha Mizbeach. So any object that had been used for a mitzvah is Noi. And this touches on the whole issue of what we do with a Chefetz Shel mitzvah. Can we just throw it out? Now we get to the kevish. So we're finished now with the tapuach, and we're up to the kevish. Oh, 1 second. I forgot one thing. We've been talking about the Gag HaMizbeach hosting the Maracha, where they took the logs and they created a fire, and that's where they burnt the Emurim. However, there's more than one Maracha. There's something called the Maracha Gedola, and that was located on the south side of the Mizbeach. Then there's something called the Maracha Shnia, a second fire, and that was on the Tzad Ma'aravi, on the western side of the Mizbeach. And then there was a third Maracha called the Maracha Shlishis, and that was because of the pasuk of Eish HaMizbeach Tukad Bo Tamid, that we have to have a fire burning on the Mizbeach Tamid, non-stop, continuously. So they added another Maracha, which was called the Maracha Shlishis, and mitzvah sasei lios Eish Yokda, that's with the mapik hey, al HaMizbeach Tamid, Afal Pisha Eish Yoreis Min Shmai Mitzvah Lahavi Eish Min HaHedjot Shenem V'Nosnu B'nei Aaron HaKohen Eish Al Mizbeach. So there are two chidushim. One is that they had to have a perpetual fire 24/7. Otherwise, they violate an Isur of Tamid, of Eish Tukad Tamid, which the mitzvah say that commands us to have an Eish that's going constantly. So the other two marachos were used and they were functioned when they were in use. But we had to have another maracha that kept the Eish going all the time, constantly, 24/7. And that was called the maracha shlishis. Now, I'm not sure what the nature of this Isur is if you extinguish the fire. For example, what if I would extinguish part of the fire, but there's still part of the fire going? Let's say I would drop liquids or water on the maracha, and I partially extinguish the fire. Is there an Isur of kibui, even b'miktsas, or no? All we need is a kiyum of eish tukad tamid. As long as the eish is still there, tamid, then I haven't violated any Isur. All right, let's talk a little about the kevesh. Now, if you take a look, the kevesh actually divides up into many different parts. There's a kevesh l'mizbeach, there's a kevesh l'sovev, and there's a kevesh l'yisod. Each one of these ribuas, you remember the squares that we spoke about, go higher and higher, and each one requires a ramp so the kohanim could, so to speak, jump off the ramp onto the yisod, onto the sovev, onto the gag hamizbeach. So we'll talk about the main kevesh, which is the kevesh hamizbeach. Now, the kevesh links up with the mizbeach on the south side. How large is this ramp that will lead us from the right side onto the mizbeach? That is 32 amos. It's gigantic, relative to everything else that we're talking about in the mikdash. This is really very large. 32 amos. But is it narrow? We understand that you go up the ramp 32 amos, but what about the width? He says, Rochav Sheshesrei amos. Not bad. It's 16 amos wide, 32 amos long. So bomba, it's a major machine over here. Hoya omed keneged emtza rechavo shel mizbeach. In other words, when you think of the mizbeach as a square, you have the width of the mizbeach on the eastern side as you approach the mizbeach. And now he's saying that keneged the emtza, he puts a kevesh. Hoya omed, the kevesh stood keneged emtza rechavo shel mizbeach. Ubo, what was the purpose of the kevesh? Quite clearly, that was the way they got access to the roof of the mizbeach. All right, there are all sorts of notes here about the security, because we're going to see that it's quite high up above the ground, reaching the top of the Mizbeach at 10 amos. You don't want to fall off the kevesh. Anyway, Amar Torah, v'lo sala b'malos al mizbechi, that when you climb up to the Mizbeach, the Torah joins you from climbing steps. And therefore, this ramp is a fulfillment of the avoidance of violating lo sala b'malos al mizbechi. So the impression you get here is that since you cannot climb steps, the Torah prohibits that, the kevesh is a substitute for steps. Do we understand how that works? It's not readily apparent. I mean, even when you're climbing up a ramp, what do you mean, lo segaler voscha olav, right? Let's say he puts one leg forward, one leg behind. Why? Shegarmim legili erva machmas harchavas hapsios. The af lo biridaso min hamizbeh. All right, but he doesn't tell you why kevesh is different. Hatam shekevesh hayu b'daron. Okay, so now he's getting into a sugya in Zvachim. The pasuk says, "Umalo seha." There's a pasuk in Tanakh. Pinos kodim. Kodim means mizrach. Shekol pinos shatapona lo yehei al derech yumin lamizbeach. Mikan sheyesh lahamed es hakevesh bitzad shemimenu yeh roi lefanos mimenu lemizbeach. So the mitzvah is to set up the kevesh in a way that'll be very easy to get from the kevesh to the mizbeach. Lefichach omar hakevesh b'tzad dorom shekasher ola legag hamizbeach v'yifne liyamin nimtza pone litzad mizrach. So there's halacha that you always want to turn towards the east. And therefore, if they set up, which they did, the kevesh on the south side, so when he goes up the ramp, he turns to the right, which is towards the tzad hamizrach. Shahu hakonim olim bo olim mitzad yimit, v'hu mizracho shel kevesh. The right side is the mizrach side. B'kshu yardim, when they come down from the kevesh, the kohanim mitzad small, mitzad marav shel kevesh hayu yardim. So now they're turning towards the left, which is towards the west. Okay, so what do you gain by that? Kishiyordim mitzad small. So we need a little bit of a video here. So they're coming down on the left side, and that's the Marav Shel Kevesh. So they went up on the south. I'm saying they went up on the east and then they turned south. And now on the way down, they are on the western side of the Kevesh. In other words, it makes sense if you go up towards the east, then you're going to come down towards the west by retracing your steps. So what do you gain by that? Shiyordim b'tzad small. B'tzad ma'arav shel hakevesh. So what's the he has a little bit of a diagram here. Let's see if this will help us. So this is Darom. So he climbs up from the Darom. But we said before it's on the Mizrach side. No, because once he goes up from the Darom, he's going to turn towards his right, which is Mizrach. Okay, that's good. Now let's see, when he's going down, so he's on the Ma'arav side. Shem Yordim, Bitzad small. If they're going up, they turn to the right and they're facing Mizrach. If they're coming down, then the Mizrach is on the left. So how does he get to the west? Why is he on the western side? So the west now is on his right. When he goes up, the east is on his right. And when he comes down, the east is on his left. Okay, I still don't understand what he means by Ma'arav over here. Shayu Yordin, Bitzad small, Bitzad Ma'arav Shalakeves, Shayu Yordin. I understand why it's sad small, but then sad small should be facing the Mizrach. Why is he calling it the western side, the Ma'arav side? I don't know. He doesn't clarify that. All right, we'll just finish the paragraph because I see he says Kasher Hoya Koin Makriv Magil Rosh Hakevesh Hoya Zorik Mishom Es Hanisachim Shal Karbonos Me'al Ha'avir She'amafsik Ben Hakevesh L'Mizbeh. So the actual application or laying down the innards of the carbon was done from the kevesh. The Kohen is carrying these segments of the carbon up the ramp, up the kevesh, and there's a small airspace that separates between the kevesh and the mizbeach, and he would take these nisachim and throw them over that airspace or through that airspace until they landed on the mizbeach. Od hayu mishamish hakevesh, shebo hayu molchim es ha'ivar. Right, this has to be studied more in depth. He's saying that somewhere on the kevesh they had a place, a platform, where they did malicha and they salted a varim. It's a sugi menachos. Pa'amim shayu mefazrin melach al gabi hakevesh kedei shelo yachliku. He says they also would salt the kevesh so that people wouldn't slip on it. Okay, so that will, there's a long footnote on that. Maybe we'll get to that next week. Okay. So I think the next time we'll get together is on Monday. I just want to make sure I don't forget that.